Did you hear our kids outside? They're having a celebration. It's the last day of their religious exploration class this morning. I love hearing them because our kids are us, and it's great. We were visiting my grandparents in Vermont. One morning after I got up, I went into the bathroom and found on the back of the toilet a most interesting, squishy, plasticky, shallow cup or bowl-like thing. I was very curious. It seemed sort of like a toy, but in the bathroom? Not where toys usually were. Toys were downstairs in the living room in a big basket. I picked it up and brought it to my mother to ask what it is. "Oh," she said, "where did you find that?" "On the back of the toilet." "Ah, okay, let's go back and put that back there." So we went to the bathroom, and I put my grandmother's diaphragm back on the back of the toilet where I had found it. My mother told me to wash my hands, and then we sat down and had a small, age-appropriate conversation about birth control. I was quite young, maybe 4 or 5. After this brief conversation, my mother told me to not pick up things like that again, and then she went to tell her mother what had happened. Later in the 1970s, I remember my mother and her friends talking excitedly about a very important book, Our Bodies, Ourselves. My mother brought home a copy, and she told me how important it was to know about our bodies and how they work, so that we could make decisions about ourselves. She tried to explain that a few short years before, women could not make certain decisions about their bodies. I did not understand at that point in my life. I had not yet experienced what it meant to make decisions about my own body, or to experience when my agency was denied. However, I did recognize that whatever it was that my mother was explaining was important. To this day, whenever I see a copy of the book Our Bodies, Ourselves, I rejoice because it is a sliver of hope that we are, or we were, moving towards a more equitable society for all people. In the mid-1980s in 9th grade, I went through the precursor of Our Whole Lives, the OWL program, the comprehensive sexuality education curriculum of the Unitarian Universalist Association and the United Church of Christ. This curriculum and my Unitarian Universalist congregation, my mother and her friends all taught me that I can make decisions about my body. I can make choices. And the decisions about my body are private and personal decisions, made privately by myself or collaboratively with others who would be impacted by those decisions. My right to make decisions about my body, specifically in regard to my sexual health, contraceptives, and pregnancy, has been legal for most of my life. Birth control has been legal for all people in America since 1972, and in 1973, the Supreme Court ruled that the Constitution protects a person's liberty to have an abortion. When I wanted birth control, I knew it was available. I had access to Planned Parenthood with free or inexpensive contraceptives, and at other times I had health insurance that covered family planning. I knew how to find out where to make an appointment for an abortion if that was going to be a choice. It is a privilege to have this access. However, because I had access to these, I have taken for granted my rights from time to time. But those of you who were teenagers or young adults in the 50s, 60s, or 70s remember the time before. This past week, I asked those of you who read the UUSO chat, which is one of the ways that the congregation communicates with each other during the week. Anyone is welcome to join the chat if you'd like. You can ask the welcome table after the service. I asked this past week what folks remembered about the years before and after Roe v. Wade and the women's rights movement. I asked what you all are thinking about as we contemplate the Supreme Court repealing Roe v. Wade, and the suggestion that other rights, including access to birth control, interracial marriage, and gay marriage, might be reviewed. One of you shared, "I remember clearly the time before birth control and the time after. I was about 16 when the pill became available. I felt everything shift. I felt free to have relationships. I was in charge of myself." And then thinking about today, knowing that women will again be living in fear that they will not feel in charge of themselves is unbelievable. To know that we could be in control of our lives but are being denied our rights. It is beyond comprehension. I find this so difficult, I have to limit the amount of time I think about it. Another of you shared from a different perspective. "Shortly after my first marriage, I suddenly realized that my wife was now supposed to be known by my last name. It came as a shock to me to realize that she was now seen by our society as simply a satellite of me, and she had completely lost her own identity. I found this quite disturbing. It was before the time when many women kept their own name after marriage." One of you shared, "In 1970, I led demonstrations for our college health center to provide contraceptive information without parental support, without parental permission. Before that, I coordinated chartering a bus to take students to Planned Parenthood over an hour away." And then you shared, "With the threat of Roe v. Wade being struck down, beyond all my years of advocacy work being negated, my thoughts go to all of the children of parents who lost and will lose the right to abort." You continued, "Our social services, already overtaxed, will be flooded with children from poverty, not adopted, growing up in foster care, and being thrown out into the world unsupported when they come of age." Many of you have fought for and lived during the time when new reproductive rights were demanded and granted. And now we face this again. We may need to name our fears and sorrows in order to continue the fight for reproductive justice. One of you shared, "One of my fears, though it seems far-fetched right now, is that if abortion and/or birth control is criminalized, women who are caught receiving these services could be imprisoned and/or have a criminal record. In some states, this means that you are not allowed to vote, either for a certain amount of time or forever. If we lose a majority of women's rights to vote, it is going to be very difficult to continue moving along a progressive path in government." And then I'm also just sad about it. It felt like we were getting to a better place for people of all genders and all sexualities. We were starting to impart more equal judgment or acceptance of male and female and all expressions of gender and sexuality, instead of heavy double standards. I think that allowing these types of laws back into practice is going to turn that side of things completely backwards again. Sister Song, a multi-ethnic reproductive justice collective defines reproductive justice as the human right to maintain personal bodily autonomy, have children, not have children, and parent the children we have in safe and sustainable communities. It is important to remember that reproductive justice is not only for women, but for all people of all genders and all sexualities. Reproductive justice is for all people. As a white cisgender woman who grew up in a liberal suburb in a liberal state, I always had the knowledge about and access to family planning resources. I always had a choice. This is a privilege because not all people have this access. Black, Indigenous, and poor families, trans and queer and LGBTQ+ people often do not have this same access. Sister Song and other reproductive justice activists remind us that mainstream movements have focused on keeping abortion legal as an individual choice. That is necessary, they say, but not enough. Even when abortion is legal, many people of color and others cannot afford it, or cannot afford to travel hundreds of miles to the nearest clinic. There is no choice where there is no access. There is no choice where there is no access. Reproductive justice activists teach that it is not just about abortion. Marginalized people often have difficulty accessing birth control, comprehensive sex education, STI prevention and care, alternative birth options, adequate prenatal and pregnancy care, domestic violence assistance, adequate wages to support families, safe homes, and so much more. So the question becomes, what can we do? What can we do? How can those of us with a certain amount of power and privilege in a state where abortion will most likely remain legal and available support those who do not, or soon may not, have access to resources? What can we do? A recently formed multiracial, multi-faith movement of congregations across the country named the Spiritual Alliance of Communities for Reproductive Dignity, with the acronym SACRED, published a document with suggested actions. They suggest reaching out to local organizations and health centers that are already addressing reproductive justice issues is an appropriate and logical first step. However, if these places receive many inquiries, they will then spend their time responding to these inquiries rather than doing their work. Instead, Sacred recommends organizing people in the congregation, connecting with other faith activists in the community, and organizing as a group. And then one or two people from that group can reach out to local health centers and organizations. Ideally, we would work with existing local and state faith-based organizations, so we do not need to build an entirely new infrastructure. Unfortunately, there has not been significant investment in abortion access and reproductive justice in the last few decades. So many states do not currently have faith organizations with the capacity to lead this work. As we join together and organize, we might be able to offer direct action, such as meeting people at travel centers, airports, bus and train stations, to offer local transportation. Or we might be able to provide safe and secure, comfortable places to prepare and recover. There are many direct actions that we can take. With our memories of the past, with our heartbreak and sorrow in the present, And with our fears about the future, we can join hands with each other and take our righteous anger out into the streets to again protect each other's ability to make decisions about our bodies and provide access for all.